for nonprofits and other mission-driven organizations. Communicating our impact is important for building support, fundraising, working with allies, and building long-term sustainability. So how do you get started? How do you do that? How do you effectively tell your story and make sure people understand how you're showing up for the community you serve? That's what we're going to talk about today, how to communicate your program or organization's impact.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Good morning and welcome back to Coffee Time. This is a 30-minute show with and for the leaders of mission-based organizations about leading through uncertain times. I want to welcome our listeners here in the United States and in Australia and around the world. And if you are joining us, please let us know your name and where you're joining us from in the comments. I'm joined today by my colleague, Cynthia Rojas. Good morning.
Hi, Peta. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. Really good. It was a good week.
Good. Well, today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to communicate our successes.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
And right. I think a lot of organizations are so, they're so caught up in the bad and in the work that they sort of forget to celebrate their wins.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Especially externally, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about it.
Why is this important, though? Tell me what you see on your end of your work.
So many program leaders focus on communicating their success only when they're talking to funders.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'd say that's the number one, right? And it's time to fill in the final report. Okay, what did we do? And then they gather that data, they put it in the report, and they forget about it. They just go back to the day-to-day, right? They go back to the hard daily work and the grind. And then the other time they think about it is, okay, how can we raise more money? Like, how do we tell donors about this so that they'll send us more money? And that's good, but I think there are other times that are even more important, right? So, and other audiences, right? So one is, how do we communicate this in the field? How do we communicate with our allies and peers? Like, hey, we found something that's working, right? Or how do we communicate this with our elected representatives so they can understand and promote promising practices in your field?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do you share it with, we don't say stakeholders anymore, your ecosystem actors, right? How do you share it with your program participants?
Yes.
Hey, this works. With other organizations that might be tackling similar or related issues to the ones you are, right? Mm-hmm. To say like, hey, let's build an alliance around these great practices. And how do you share this to organizations that might want to send somebody to you, right? It's rare that individuals or communities only have one problem, right? Or that there's only one way to approach this problem.
Yeah.
And, hey, let's say I'm really great at doing housing and you're really great at doing job training. There's a good chance that some of your clients need my service.
Yes.
And I should actually be marketing to you, right? And communicating to you about my effectiveness is an important way to do that.
Yes.
So those are some of the audiences.
Yeah. And sometimes, and internal, and so you started with that, but mm-hmm. I am working with an organization right now that had some trouble gathering data. Yeah. And I offered to help them as the external person. It's always mm-hmm. easy to go in and say, hey, we need your data. And what I am asking for is to have a sense-making meeting with the team to talk about the struggle. What was interesting with this team is that when we put together the survey, there was a lot of intra conflict among team members about what were the right questions. And
Yeah.
a considerable amount of time on that. When I asked them how the data collection was going, it fell apart, right? But nobody owned that part.
No.
And
Yeah, I think I'm in that situation right now.
yeah, you were talking about it this morning. And
Yeah.
so even
If
that
the
is like,
program, if the people who are doing the day-to-day of the program don't understand how this data collection helps the program,
yeah,
right? They're not going to stop doing their work to collect data, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And but the learning, right? Using it to
Yeah.
learn. And that's what you're talking about, is using it
Right.
to learn. If individuals are not filling out a survey, oh wow, we should examine that.
Yeah.
We should examine that. And so I love this. I love this
I want
topic.
to go back to something else that you said about there was a lot of conflict about what questions to ask.
Oh yeah.
I hear that as we're not really clear on how we're going to know this program is working.
Yeah.
Right. That's a logic model problem to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And everything is a logic model problem to me. Right.
That's why I chuckled.
Yeah. I will always find a way to bring it back to logic models. The issue here is lack of clarity on exactly what success is going to look like, right? Means we can't design our evaluation plan, so we're not going to know when we get there, right?
Yeah.
I'm working on a project right now that we're just wrapping up. We had a really productive conversation very early on about what success in this program looked like, right? And the leader of the program was able to articulate, like, when we went for this money, we were looking for 3 things. We were looking for direct outcomes for the clients. We were looking for capacity building, and we were looking for systems change. I organized my final report with those headings. And it made it so easy to understand whether we had done those 3 things and how, and what the opportunities for further improvements were going to be, right? So tremendously helpful if you can articulate what success is going to look like, for your program, for your participants. And it gets really messy and awkward when you don't have that, right? That's when you get a lot of, these alternative outcomes that drive me nuts. Like, well, people came, they had a positive experience, they felt cared for. That's not what people signed up for.
Right.
Right? That is not success for your program.
Right.
Yeah.
And can we just say it, because I get this a lot as well. Attendance is not an outcome.
It is a performance measure, and it's a performance measure for you,
right,
not the client.
Right.
It is a measure of how well your program is meeting the needs of those clients, because those clients are resourceful and they're good at getting their needs met. And if they're getting their needs met better somewhere else, that's a you problem, not a them problem.
Yes. I mean, you and I are learning this, and well, I'm learning this, but you know this, that in workforce, there's a lot of training.
Yeah.
Right? And the outcome is, well, we graduate 20 people per cohort.
Yeah.
When you ask people, do they have jobs, which is
right, which is really the thing. Yeah.
Right.
And I get it. It's hard. It can be hard. It's going to be time consuming. You are going to have to call those people. You are just going to have to get on the phone and call every one of them to collect this data, because they're busy now at their jobs. So they're not hanging around your office, doing job seeking stuff. They're busy at work. But that is your outcome. Like, that's what you need to be holding yourself accountable for. And that is the outcome that people are going to get, right? So here's the other part about communicating this outside of your organization, is what does somebody who doesn't know your industry, right? What is this data point or success measure or KPI going to mean to them?
I love that.
Right. So I see a lot of data points that say something like, we enrolled 1,000 students. And I always think, like, well, out of how many? How many students have this problem? Right? Is that all of them or a tiny fraction of them? Is that more than all the other programs in your area? Is it fewer? Like maybe it's deliberately a very small cohort and you're providing one-on-one support, right? But somebody who's never heard of your organization or doesn't really know your issue well is going to need some of that context to understand, right? And when we're talking about communicating a measure that's going to go out in the world and sort of represent what you do, I talk about having storytelling power. That anybody, even people who don't know your work very well, should immediately understand, like, oh, that's why that's important.
Yes.
That tells me, right? You know,
Yes.
this is how many people moved into their new apartments this year. Like, oh, I get it. Like, that's important. I can picture it. I'm moved by it. I can understand. When you tell me metrics like butts in seats, right?
Yeah.
Or attendance percentages, I'm not really going to get it. I'm not really going to understand or be, moved.
So I love this idea because when I started my journey in evaluation 20 something years ago, I was in the youth development ecosystem. And one of the things about youth development programming, one of the challenges is funding. It is hard to fund preventative work because it is hard to prove, right? Or at least that's the argument we get.
Yes, it is.
And it's even harder to get employers on the bandwagon and help them see that this is something they should care about.
Yes.
Because if my child does not have a place to go after work and I am working in your company, I am worried.
Right.
My child could be hurt. They could be getting into trouble. I would probably take more days off. And so it was very, very difficult and not successful to get employers.
No, I mean, because we have operated up until very recently under this fallacy that when people get to work, their home brains just shut off. Like they don't even know they have children. Right? Which is not actually how people operate.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so the connection that you have made earlier about housing and workforce. So we see that I was working with someone in the Berkshires a year ago, and they have a huge problem. No one can afford to live there,
right?
Unless you are wealthy.
Yeah,
and guess what?
They need people to do, particularly because they have an aging population. Right. So they need a lot of carers and property maintenance workers, and those people absolutely can't afford to live in those regions. Yeah.
And during the pandemic, their main street was like isolated. They lost all their storefronts. Restaurants had to shut down. No one was working. And they weren't, and it's not because of the pandemic. That happened to everybody, but people could not afford to live there.
Yep.
There was a huge increase in real estate, the way there was everywhere. But a lot of city folks moved.
Oh yeah, we're like, why? Right. Yeah, right.
And people couldn't afford to live there, so they had no one to work in the restaurants, and no one to work in the libraries, and no one to work in the community centers, and no one to work in the laundromats. They probably don't need laundromats, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, right.
I was like, wow, how one thing affects another. So where people say affordable housing, now people are using the term work housing. Right?
Yes, we're coming back to company towns, and we're going to have little worker housing villages.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I know.
Sometimes I'm like, really? Like, we will do absolutely anything to avoid just paying living wages.
Right. But I'll tell you what I like about the term work housing is that we're putting these two ecosystems together in one word, right? And we're starting to see that they are related, right? And we all have this image of what affordable housing is or may look like, and not that it needs to look that way, right? But I think work housing puts the onus both on workforce development and housing.
Yes.
Puts them together.
Yes, I have been, lecturing on this for a while, that your workforce issues, your housing issues, and your transportation issues are all the same issue.
Yeah.
And that it's a regional issue, not a local issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we communicate to legislators? I mean, that's a hard one for nonprofits.
Yeah, it is. And actually, here, this is like a good example of where we have this complicated issue, right? And it's hard to explain, right? And here's one of the things about our elected representatives is they're really busy, right? And they are usually trying to keep track of multiple issues in their districts. So you've got to simplify it for them. And I don't mean like they're not intelligent. I just mean say it to them in ways that they can understand it, understand why it's important, understand the implication in their specific geography, and understand what they should do about it, and feel confident talking about it.
Yes.
Right. So, and I think they're really eager for education. So invite them, right? If you are having an event, which I highly recommend, like have an event, showcase your findings, invite your ecosystem actors, right? And display your work, and invite your elected representatives and let them see, like, here is this part of this issue that we're addressing in this way, right? And here are the other things and agencies and organizations that are connected to it.
And you can also communicate your learnings, right? One of my favorite professional moments was when I did a study and the data was looking the other way, and we couldn't figure out why. And we presented it to the funder that was funding the program, and guess what they did? They gave us another $100,000 to find out what was the issue.
I think so often we're afraid to go to our funders and say, like, that we're not getting the results we expected.
Right.
Right. And they're your friends, right? I think for the most part, they would rather that you come to them and say, like, this is not going the way we thought it would go. Right. We have implemented, we have done what we said we would do. And here is the obstacle that we're facing. Like, come sit with us and help us figure this out.
Yeah.
Right.
And they love that stuff.
Yeah.
They love that stuff.
Right. Which is why they always ask now in grant reports, what have you learned? What would you do better next time?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But like, let's do that really early on. It can really help prevent, I mean, look at them. They're like free consultants, right? So one, they look at a lot of programs, right? And two, they have like the distance from your program.
Yeah.
That is the big advantage of bringing in outside consultants, right? So like, use them, right? Yes. Don't hide or be secretive, and just say, look, here's what I'm always telling people. All of the easy problems have already been solved. So don't be ashamed or embarrassed that you didn't easily solve poverty or homelessness or whatever it is, right? Like, not only is it complicated, but there are a lot of forces working against you, right? There is this massive policy structure that's probably designed to maintain this problem that you work on, right? So don't feel bad about the fact that your one program and engaging 20 students didn't solve the problem, right? But be realistic, right? Say, hey, either we think this program could do better, we're going to make some adjustments, right? Or, hey, we tried this and maybe this isn't the best approach in our community and we're going to try something else, right? Yeah. I mean, that's how we solve, tougher problems.
I think so. And there's a lot to be said in the trying.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Another place to communicate your stuff is a lot of organizations are going to be like, where, how? We don't have a communications office. We don't have a media outlet. Like, do you have TikTok? Do you have Instagram? Do you have a blog? The other agencies in your space are really interested in these small learnings. I mean, things that you think, oh, everybody knows, right? I'm constantly learning new things about, like, what kind of gift cards to give people, right? Trust me, your peers want to know whether they should be giving out Target gift cards or CVS gift cards, or right? that actually matters, right?
Yes.
How do you do childcare for your event? If you are doing an event and you're getting great community engagement because you provided childcare and it worked, like do a blog post on that. Other agencies care. That is important and that's a big win, right? Don't feel like that is not worth sharing. It's not important. Sometimes you're so close to it, you don't understand.
Yeah, the hoarding of information, and you
Yeah.
taught me this very early in our friendship. The hoarding of information is unkind and manifest. Well, I think you said something else, but
unkind doesn't sound like me, but that's a good way to put it.
it manifests oppression, right?
It
And
does, yes.
for those who are in academia,
Yeah.
Try getting research articles if you're not
Right.
part of a university. Good luck
Yeah.
with that, right?
Right,
And
right.
so if you are surveying people or you are developing a program and you are learning and you keep that to yourself, you are
Right.
hoarding information that could be changing more lives.
It could be changing more lives, right?
Yeah.
And here's this other, tension that I come across a lot, when I come to organizations and I'm like, so tell me about how you're eradicating poverty, right? Tell me about what it's going to look like when you finish solving this problem, which is always where I start. And sometimes they say like, oh no, like we're just a small program. We are not going to eradicate all of poverty. We're not going to house everybody. And I say, no, you're not you personally, maybe, but let's put ourselves on the side of the people who are going to do that. And let's think big, right?
Mhm.
I don't really want to be in the industry of we run small programs that don't really get results.
Right.
I want to be in the industry of it took a lot of us and a lot of effort, but we solved big problems, right? Even if it's not during my career or my lifetime. I want to remain convinced that we are going to solve these big problems,
Mhm.
right? And so creating these kinds of allyships, right, through sharing what you have done, right? Like even when you only did it with, 20, right, a cohort of 20, you are still showing other people how it can be done. And if 1,000 more organizations do what you're doing, eventually we reach everybody, right?
Yes.
Or at least say, oh, hey, look, that's a problem I don't have to solve, right?
Right.
Like I can, I recently had this really great case where an organization, several organizations created this learning community of practice and started kind of reaching outside of their wheelhouses and learning different things about their clients, right? Outside of the area of the specific service that they provided. And in the course of that, one of these organizations found out that a lot of the people they were serving were undocumented. And they hadn't known that before. Like it was a major barrier that they didn't know before because it wasn't their specific space. Well, they did a little bit of research and they asked their friends and they found an agency in a nearby town that just specifically worked with undocumented people and helped them, right? And they've created this really great relationship. They know what days to refer people, who to call, they're sending people over there routinely and it's really productive and they're building this thriving alliance. Well, how great for them to encounter this problem and not just say like, whoa, that's too big for us.
Right.
Right, to encounter the problem and the solution in one go. And now they can serve their youth so much better, even though they're not actually, it's not taking a whole lot more of their resources. They just call a friend, it's taken care of, right?
Yes.
They didn't build up a legal immigration wing to do it, which would not be the right use of resources in this little organization. But everybody's doing better, right?
Yeah.
And now they're going around talking about how great this other organization is, right? Right. They're going out communicating their wins, because this is a great service for their young people. So, here are some of the ways that it helps. Yeah.
One of the things I think nonprofits also struggle with, and they're very good at doing it for fundraising, is telling the story. So they're really good. I love reading fundraising requests and getting a letter and hearing about a family changing their lives. But it's one story.
Yeah.
And so the truth is the organization does a lot more. And I think that's where they struggle. How do we take data? How do we take 80% of our graduates got a job? How do they take that and make a story? And I think that's where they struggle.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that, I mean, that hits on three, I'm not going to confine myself to three. It hits on several problems. Like the one is that communication power issue, right? That when I'm outside of the organization, I might think, geez, only 80%? Like, why not all of them? Right. And so you got to send that piece of data with some context. Like, here's what is average in our field.
Yeah.
Right. Some kind of a counterfactual. And then highlight with like, here's what it really looks like when somebody gets a job. Right? Like here's the impact for that individual and their family and their kids and their community when they have this job, and their employer, right? Because we've really got to get employers understanding this when they get a job, right? And different people are going to react to different ones of those data points, but that's like how you tell that complete story, right? And it's okay to really just have one data point. I mean, if that's what you do is get people jobs, you only need one KPI. Yeah, that is perfect, right? One KPI and then a comprehensive story around it.
Yes,
is more effective than 20 different numbers that just kind of confuse people, And
I want to reiterate what you said, putting it into context. Like if 80% is your number, and I'm that person where I'm always like, what happens to the 20%?
Right. Yes.
Especially if it's your child or your loved one, right? And so, but if you're doing 80% and everyone else is doing 55%, oh my, the story just changed for me.
Right. That's completely different. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, right? And what it is you're doing that you have such a
Yes. Or you're placing 80% when you work with a population that has multiple significant barriers to employment. Right.
Yes.
Like, then it's huge. Right.
Yes. Yeah. I love this. I don't think we made it easier.
I will make it easier.
Right. I think we highlighted
that I can tell a good story.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And be aware that you have multiple audiences.
Yes.
And people really do want to hear. Like, I always want to hear, and even if I don't use the service, right? When I was working with a bunch of food banks a couple of months ago, and just the work that they did, there was a time where we were running out of food, right? The supermarkets were empty. Nobody had toilet paper because everybody was hoarding it. And food banks had to go out and buy food because they could no longer get it from the restaurants or from donations.
Yeah, right. Of course, because they were shut down.
Like, we lived through that time. And when I hear about their work, I am just in awe. So trust me, people want to hear. People want to hear what's going out there, and that my brothers and sisters who are starving or hungry or food insecure, to use a fancy word, but it really is about hunger, are being taken care of. Tell your story. Tell your story. You have an audience.
Yeah, you do. You do. And it doesn't have to be huge, right? I mean, there are organizations that are super good at getting their stuff in the newspaper, right? And that's great. But one of the fantastic things about the modern era is that we have all of these channels, right? Like the ones we're using now to disseminate information.
Yeah.
Right? And that is all very useful too.
Yeah. And we use one portal, but this talk show, it's many platforms. So it is easier in that sense.
Yeah. And don't wait until the end. Don't wait until the funder report is coming out. Don't do it once a year. Do it all the time, and do it internally too, right? Like we spend a lot of time on our failures and misses. We do not spend enough time celebrating our wins.
You're right.
And that is really Like the entire point of measuring our outcomes is so that we're going to know when we win, right? We're going to know when the problem is solved, right? And it keeps people motivated when we focus on our successes. It's, you
What
know,
gets measured gets done.
yeah, right. We spend a lot of time on hard things. So
Me too.
stop and celebrate your wins.
All right. Well,
So
great
thank
interview.
you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day and Juneteenth.
Yeah.
See you next week.
All right.